Lastly, we have the suit of swords, or the suit, I always like to say, are you in your head, or of being in your head, worrying, a lot of mentalism, mental chatter often when these cards show up. So this suit is all about thoughts, reason, and logic. This suit is highly intellectual, and these cards are all about the mind and thinking, and then, like I said, often worry. So these cards show up when we are worried or we feel we've been cheated or betrayed or even slighted in some way. These cards will show up in a reading. They're the cards of being in our head, but they also represent how we use our mind to problem solve. These cards are about planning, about clear communication, and speaking our truth. Always about clear communication and speaking our truth, getting out of our head, communicating clearly, speaking our truth. It's really, for me, the foundation of what these cards are about and what they represent. So they represent our intellect and how we use it in our day-to-day life. And the element is air. The astrology associated is Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius, so all of the air signs. The timing is winter, and then these cards are over quickly, which is nice because they're probably the most negative of all in the deck, but they're over in a matter of days. So if you're asking about timing, swords cards represent days. Just so that you don't get confused, don't worry about this timing thing unless you're specifically asking for timing. Like, when is this going to happen? As you become more advanced in learning how to read, you'll realize on your own when a swords card is showing up to indicate timing. But in the meantime, as you're learning, don't worry too much about it. But if you do want to ask for a specific time, then you'll know that if a swords card shows up, it's days. It's going to happen in a matter of days. Generally shorter than 14 days. So as you're looking at the cards, like up to 10 days, obviously, and then the court cards can have some numerological association that we'll talk about when we start covering court cards. Okay, so their gender is male. They're a very masculine card. Intellect, obviously, systems, processes. So they're sometimes called arrows, staves, or air, and they are the spades in the deck of traditional playing cards. So other meanings of this suit are mentalism, the mind and thoughts, freedom, especially when speaking our truth, the freedom that can come from that and the mental clarity that can come from that. Facts and figures, so mathematics is often shows up and is represented when we're talking about the suit of swords. With the court cards, I think it's really interesting because doctors and lawyers and mathematicians and scientists will almost always show up as court cards. So if you've got somebody in your life that represents one of those, that is in one of those professions, they will oftentimes show up as the knight, the page, the king, the queen of swords. Strength and power, intellect, communication, we talked about before, worry, the truth, problems and solutions. So with the swords cards, something that I think is so interesting is that they often will show up when there's a problem, but when they show up and you see them in a reading, it means that you always have the ability to think through and figure out the solution to the problem. One of the cards I love, and we'll talk about this as we get into the eights, but the Eight of Swords shows a woman bound by ropes and she has a blindfold on. But if you look closely at the ropes, they're so loose that she literally could just shake them off. So it's all about getting unstuck in the mind, not necessarily in the physical body. And then decisions. This deck represents making decisions, clear communication, and being decisive and standing in your truth and making decisions. Oftentimes when the Queen of Swords will show up in a reading, I will say, you need to just make a decision. You need to stand in your power. You need to just decide that you want it to be this way. So, Suit of Swords definitely gets a negative connotation a lot, but I think it can really give us a lot of clarity on how to move forward out of a particular situation that we're in. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, feel free to tag me. Mwah.